You're most welcome to this EuroScience webinar that we are hosting today. My name is Teresa and my colleague Brian is here as well. We are from the governing board of EuroScience, and we decided to be running this webinar with Eoin that will be talking about the Industry Collaboration Toolkit. So I would like to present Eoin Galligan first, who has a background in pharma consultancy. And at the moment, he's working as a senior business development manager at TTO Business Development at Aarhus University, which is in Denmark. And in his work, he helps researchers to start innovation partnerships together with many different industry sectors to help researchers to achieve what we call research impact. I think he will be talking a little bit about that as well. Mm-hmm. So yes, he will be presenting a toolkit of skills that are aimed to help researchers to communicate with industry in order to design successful collaborations. So thank you very much, Eoin, for being here with us today, and we really look forward to your talk. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Teresa. Thank you for the introduction. As Teresa was saying, my name is Eoin. I work with researchers. I've been doing this for about 10 years in creating relationships. And you could say that the reason that I feel that this is an interesting subject is that from the time and the experience that I've gained of working with researchers, I felt that this is an area that I can assist researchers in the process of building these type of relationships. That's the background to why I'm proposing these ideas. It's my experience of working with researchers. Now, just look to get to the next slide. The goal for this discussion is that if I'm going to help researchers, I'm hoping that I can persuade you that I feel that all researchers, so going from the top down to the bottom of your career level, need a set of strategic skills to help develop these relationships with companies. Now, my own background is within science, and I'm currently studying an MBA right now. And so if we say that society trains individuals, so if you look at managers in the private sector, in government, and also in the charity sector, society is training all of these individuals to have this strategic perception on how to generate these relationships. So if we can do that for them, then surely why can't we do that for PhD students and for postdocs? And just take the concepts that I use, that these are business concepts, but to adapt them and to reframe them for the academic context. That's really my goal, and I hope I can persuade you about that. Just to look at the key problem. If my approach is a solution, what is the problem that I'm trying to solve? And if we just look at the cartoon on this slide, so I have an axis of time, and then there are some speech bubbles there. So if you imagine that a postdoc goes to a conference and they happen to meet with somebody from industry, so they meet with a scientist from a company and they find that they have something in common, and they start a dialogue at that conference. And over time, as they are beginning that discussion, then they bring in more people from the university and more people in from the company. And so the relationship starts to grow. But what happens quite frequently is that there are misunderstandings. Expectations are not met. People are trying to understand, well, what is the definition of value? Like, what's the purpose of the collaboration for the company? And what's the purpose of the collaboration for the university? And this kind of area is where I spend a lot of my time. And that's really the areas and the problems that I try to resolve with the researchers that I work with. Now, that's my own perspective of this kind of problem, this kind of challenge. And I thought it'd be interesting just to get a second perspective on this. And on the call, we should have Irina from Science Foundation Ireland. Irina, can you hear me? If you could offer your thoughts on this. What do you think about this problem? Is this something that you experience yourself?
Yeah, I think myself, I've been working in a project that has in the past that a company is involved and university is involved, and me myself was embedded in a university in a company. Sorry,
right.
So I really saw how I had to adapt my speech depending on who I was talking to, whether I was talking with my PI, whether I was talking with people even in the research department of the industry. So we really need to adapt our skills if we need to be successful in building those partnerships and make them efficient, because you need both parts to be completely invested in what you are trying to do. And I really think that building all those transferable skills are very useful for you as a PhD or a postdoc for your future, either if it's going to be in academia or if it's going to be outside of academia. They are going to be invaluable.
Great. Thank you, Rina. Thank you. It's good to know that there's somebody else thinking about these kind of issues. So I think the reason that I think that this problem is difficult is that there are so many different definitions of success, and it makes the partnership design complicated. So there is a scientific success, stakeholder success, and legal success criteria. Looking at, from one side, we're looking at managing a relationship where world-class research can get published. Then we have different types of stakeholders are driven by different types of criteria. And we have to produce a relationship where everyone's expectations and their understanding is built into the relationship, but then it's transferred into a legal contract. And that can be a real challenge to make that jump. So really the key observation here is that, just as Irina was saying, is that we need a real depth of understanding of communication, because with misunderstandings, it results in conflict, in higher stress, and in reality, it results in the lost opportunity of having these kind of relationships. So there could be additional funding related to these kind of relationships. And this is a key area that we could improve upon. The observations that we're just mentioning there are to improve that relationship building, communication skills area, to prevent that we have mismatched expectations, and that everyone who is involved understands that they're in a process where there will be a negotiated contract towards the end. Now, when we get to the end of this discussion, so when I've finished presenting these slides, we'll have a short group exercise, just looking at relationships. We're going to use one of the tools from Google called Jamboard, and that's where you're able to actually move different variables around on how to construct these relationships. And we'll be looking at a framework that's like this on this slide. So if we were going to consider a relationship with a company, we need to think about what would we do before the meeting, what would we do when we're sitting in front of the people at the meeting, and what would be our definition of success. So what is our individual goal, and what is our stakeholders' goal? So that's going to be something that we'll look at later. So maybe that's something that you can just have in the back of your mind, that will be using the concepts that we talk about here in that particular sort of activity a bit later. But before we get into that, I think the purpose of what I wanted to do is to propose a simple framework of how to plan collaborations. And so that's shown here. It's just broken down into 3 particular areas. Now, I have taken this framework from my own personal studies. So when I'm learning about organizational strategy, a lot of that area is built on these kind of business concepts. And the value of this is that it offers a kind of a structure to your thinking. There's a particular way that you have to think and manage your understanding when you are managing these kind of tasks. And if we just go through that framework, you can see, again, we have a process of time, and we'll have 3 different phases. So the first phase is analysis. We have to go out there and to learn about the particular area where we want to create the collaboration, to learn about the stakeholders, about the companies, and we'll cover techniques of how to conduct that kind of learning. Then we move on to the second area. When we finish with the analysis, we might have a company that we've built a relationship with, and then we need to start making some decisions. We need to choose exactly what we're going to do. And in between the first and the second phase, you can see that we have an area where we're going to present research data. So this is all broken down into a sequence of tasks, but you can see in the middle there, I have a feedback loop. So one of the complexities of these kind of relationships is that we might be at the point where we have a company and we're starting to work out what decisions we want to do, but we find out that the analysis that we did made a slight mistake or a slight flaw, and we have to go back and do some additional research for that, and then come back to the actual choosing phase. So this is very, very driven by these kind of feedback loops. It's not a simple linear process of activity. And then the final stage is on looking at how to implement the relationship, and that's the legal area. So we move from the actual time of making a decision, making a plan, we bring that over, and now we have to incorporate the relationship inside a legal contract. And once again, we have another feedback loop. So if there's any things that we made mistakes on, we might go back and choose different things. So that's the framework that we're going to use. And as a first step, we'll go into looking at the analysis stage. Now, in this particular area, as I was just mentioning in the last slide, the first goal here is to really work out how do we go out and understand our stakeholders in this particular area. And if you can see right in the center, I have a diagram of a research group, and I've connected that research group to a number of other organizations that are the stakeholders. You can see on the side there that I've given a definition, like a formal definition of what exactly is a stakeholder. And these are funny organizations because they range between your colleagues in your department to funding organizations, to industry, to companies, to government. And so we all need to have an appreciation of all of the different types of stakeholders that are going to have an effect on our performance in building these relationships. If we don't understand them, then we're going to find it very difficult to be able to persuade them to get involved in certain types of relationships. So how exactly can we do that? Well, first of all, we have to start thinking about, to improve the understanding, we need to understand the words that these stakeholders use. Now, there are many different types of words that I could have chosen, but I've chosen just 3 examples here. The first is research impact, and this is showing the contribution that excellent research makes to society and the economy. And the key message here, I think, is that ensuring everyone in the entire relationship has an understanding of what is impact. So that means the researchers from the university, but also the employees from the company. Like, you could imagine that maybe somebody who is working in marketing or in finance might not have the same level of understanding of impact. And so these kind of words need to be defined for everybody. The the next area is unmet need. And so this is, what is your knowledge of the needs of the customer? And if you're looking at creating a collaboration with a company, and say in the area of life science, you're looking at addressing a particular disease, do we understand that particular disease area by looking at the scientific literature? Or do we actually go out and speak to patients and speak to clinicians to really understand exactly how is that disease treated in particular geographies, in particular countries? So those are two different ways of understanding the unmet need. And that can be a key sort of asset of when you're building a relationship, that you have a good understanding of these kind of terms. And the final one there is value proposition. So what form of value does your research offer to a particular question? And then the important question, is your approach better? And how exactly do we define better? Now, these are all quite difficult concepts to discuss with companies, but I think the point that I'm making here is that you have to at least bring these kind of words up on the table and ensure that everybody understands what they mean as a first step. I just have an example here of a technology case that I worked with. This was an implantable scaffold within the area of cancer research. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire technology description there, but just imagine if you were starting your communication and reaching out to people. If we have the second example down there at the bottom, so the one in green, this is the taking the text and reframing it as a value proposition. And that is an implantable medical device that enables superior bone creation, which also enables the delivery of cancer drugs direct to the tumor target site. Now, that's just one sentence that really encapsulates all of the interesting aspects that a company or somebody who's coming from the commercial perspective, that really tells them the entire story of what they need to understand about this particular type of a technology. So that's just an example. And as you start to use these kind of tools, you can start to see that as you start to use language in this way, that you are being very careful to define what you mean. You're being very careful to define what you mean by value. You start to move into this area that you're working on the building blocks of these relationships. So if you are being proactively you are observing how you're using your language, you're at least trying to gain empathy and to build credibility with these kind of companies. And these are skills that you can learn for sure. But on the other side, there are aspects that are more difficult. Say trust, for example. It's the way of perceiving that is that you could have initial meetings with companies and simply state that trust is something that you want to achieve. Just simply state it to them that you are trying to learn about them and introduce how the university works to them. But building trust is one of your goals. That can be a real a powerful message that you can build. And that's one of the building blocks to taking these first steps. So once you are aware of those building blocks, how do we actually get to understand stakeholders? And what I would suggest is that we have to adopt a communication style of the interview. We have to reach out and interview these stakeholders. Now, this is described as a stakeholder research. It is built on trying to create a team. If you can imagine that the academic tradition is very much focused on the individual. Everything is focused on the individual. But if we're going to obtain this kind of knowledge from companies in this area, I would suggest that postdocs can certainly find somebody else who would also benefit from the same knowledge. And then you can research this together. Now, in this area, we're not going to be presenting data at the very early stage. The real goal here is to learn how these organizations think and how they operate. So we have to do a lot of listening in this first stage. And as we're starting to do this, over time, we are building this kind of practice into our calendar. If you imagine organizing one 20-minute interview per month, over time, the amount of knowledge that brings to a postdoc can simply improve the understanding and the empathy that that individual will have when they're talking to the industry. Now, just one way of targeting that empathy is if we can use open questions. So open questions are really when you are focusing on the key issues that make people frustrated, or the key areas that they really love. So if you're talking about a particular medical device or a particular type of technology, say within the pharmaceutical sector, you've started to move into the technical area, but asking their open questions on what area of the science are they persuaded by, do they think is a good approach to a particular problem, and what kind of approaches do they feel should be challenged, that they're not convinced by, but keep trying with open questions. And then I think just to summarize that together, as you start to do this, these interviews, they do get easier. Like when you start in the first step, this can be challenging, but by the time you get to the third and the fourth interview, this becomes a component of your standard way of communicating with people. You'll bring in the experience that you've gained from the earlier times you've done these interviews, so it does get easier. Now, I thought we could get a second opinion, and I connected with Julie Howe, who is a science journalist. I'm not sure if I can see if Julie is on the call. Julie, can you hear me? No, I don't think she's here just yet. Maybe she can join a little bit later on. But I was trying to do the same thing as we did earlier, because this is one particular area that journalists are skilled at. So hopefully Julie can join a bit later on. But I will continue. Just moving to the next slide. If you're going to take this step and start to think about trying to do this analysis and get this knowledge from reaching out to people. So where do we get names from? How do we start? And I've put up some examples of where you can get those names. We can look at conferences, at PubMed, at the scientific literature, doing some simple email tricks as trying to search for the company domain can bring up a lot of individuals on a simple Google search. And also, of course, things like in social media, like LinkedIn and Twitter, there's a huge number of people who are proactively communicating about their particular technical area. So when you are gathering those kind of names, the way that you manage that is that you create a target list. And if I go back to the idea that you're working as a team, this target list could be the basis for a team. So this could be 2 postdocs, a PhD student, maybe a master's student. They all have a particular interest about learning a particular aspect of the industry sector. So a particular type of company or a particular type of technology, and they want to speak to people in companies about that area. And so they're using the target list to manage the workload, to manage how they're conducting all of these calls. And in the target list there, you can see that I've the name and the title of these individuals. But the real power of this list is that you prioritize the importance of these people in the actual table. So you have the people right at the top that you'd love to collaborate with, and then down at the bottom you have the companies that are probably not so influential, and they're in the same field, but they're not the key leaders of the area. So the way that we manage this list is we work up. We start from the bottom and we work our way up to the top. And the value or the benefit of doing it this way is that when you're taking those first steps to learn how to manage to do these interviews, you're starting with the companies that you probably don't want to collaborate with in the first place. And if the first interview is difficult or challenging, or you make mistakes, you'll carry on to learn. And as you keep working up the list, the quality of your communication and the quality of the interview is getting better and better. So by the time that you're up there at the top, you sound like somebody who has empathy for this particular area. You're somebody who has credibility because you've been speaking with people in this sector. And so that's a key tool of how to structure who exactly are you going to talk to in this process. I've included a script here because I often get asked, how do you approach these people? Now, I'm not going to read out that entire script, but there's a few sort of characteristics of the script that you can see there. And I'm really trying to target the emotional aspect to the person who's receiving this email. So the moment that I find somebody, you'd be reaching out to them to say that you're immediately curious to speak with them because they have some expertise and you'd love to gain their perspective. So you're asking for a 20-minute call, maybe say next month. You're giving a little bit of flattery, you're being flexible, and you're focusing the logic as to why you want to speak to them about a particular area. So, of course, if you send out 20 of these kind of emails, it's for sure going to happen that you'll get many people that will say no. So you may well get ignored by 70% of the people that you contact, but you might get a response from 30% of the people that you send out. So you have to take the long time perspective on this, is that as you are approaching this, you are going to have to use the target list, and you won't get to speak to everybody, but you'll get to speak to some good people over time. So then next, as we come to the end of that section, that's like thinking about this activity of the analysis, of learning about the area that we want to get involved in. And now we come to the time to make decisions. So the choosing sector. So on this, here I have put up a to-do list. So once you have conducted all of those early discussions and learned about this area, you now have a company who is curious about working with you in some way. And so you have some decisions to make. So I've got 7 tasks that I think are really fundamental areas. The first thing is to ensure that the process with all of the people in the company is managed really well. Then produce a document that has a definition of the problem and a definition of the solution. And the reason that that's important is just that everybody who is involved, they fully understand what is the purpose of the collaboration. What exactly are we looking at, and what is the solution to that particular issue? Then use a Gantt chart. So I'll show one in a moment. And this describes the people, the tasks, and when those tasks would actually occur. The next stage is to meet the university and the company lawyers early. So before you get to the last stage, meet these lawyers where you can start to ask questions and to get to understand their perspective. And in addition to doing that, to write the planning, the research plan and any additional activities, to write that together with the company. So you are not simply applying for any kind of research grant with a company and doing the communication over email, but instead you are booking face-to-face meetings. You have a document that is recording exactly what has been discussed. If you're organizing minutes, then they can be included. And so everyone has a written record of exactly what the research plan is going to be. The next one is to seek approval. So again, to do this early, so to understand who is responsible at the university for approving collaborations with industry. In many cases, that would be the head of department of a particular area in the university. It might go up to the dean's office in some institutions, but you also have to do the same thing with the company. So who actually approves these types of collaborations? Then number 6 is understanding that in the lifetime of the collaboration, what events will happen. Some examples could be that other researchers want to publish. Now, are they going to publish material that could have an effect on the collaboration? The other example is looking at exams, say a PhD exam. Sometimes those exams are public, and would the presentation of the PhD, would that include any data that needs to be presented to the company first? So all of this needs to be connected, that the events that are happening are not going to create any unnecessary risk to the collaboration. And then finally, just connecting up with the planning documents that don't rely on email. So if you want to create understanding, we have to connect back to what we were discussing before. And it has to be done by face-to-face meetings and by really good communication skills. I mentioned the GANNT chart. So here is an example of that. As you can see on the left-hand side, it describes the different tasks that would be sort of performed in the collaboration. It also lists the individual that would be responsible for each part of that task. And then as we go horizontal, you can see there is a time. So we basically can put in a budget for each task over time. And the advantage of doing it this way is that everyone involved in the collaboration, they can see where all the money is being used. So you could put in a milestone in the middle. So you can see that milestone in red. That could be a review meeting to assess where should these kind of activities be performed. Should we have that experiment being conducted at the university? And we need to have funding for that. Or could the company donate time? And that experiment could be done in the company premises, for example. So that's the Gantt chart. Then as we are getting into this process now of planning and making decisions, one concept that I think is quite useful is understanding the value chain. Now the value chain is defined, and you can see then there at the bottom, I've mentioned Michael Porter. He is a business professor, and he developed this and suggests that the value chain identifies where value is created across a company. So you can see the diagram there. Now, I'm not going to go into all of them, but the key message here is that you can take a company and you can break it into separate components. So many of us from, say, with a technology background would understand talking to people in the technology development department. But you can see there is value being created in the marketing and sales, in the service, in lots of different parts of the organization. And the reason that that's important is that the value chain helps us think that all of these different people, all of the different people that are based in the different aspects of the value chain, they have an opinion, a perspective, and that's something that we need to understand. So in this cartoon that I've just shown there, we have the PhD or the postdoc that's circled with the blue. And on the other side, we have a senior scientist. And suddenly these individuals have been joined by other people, such as on the university side, the head of department is curious about the collaboration. And on the company side, the CEO and the finance director, they want to start listening. So we've moved from a relationship between two individuals to a relationship between two organizations. And that's a fundamental difference there. So that's one thing on the value chain. And then as you start to understand all those different perspectives from those different people across the value chain, we go into an area that can be thought of as a scenario analysis. So thinking what could happen. And this is something that we can discuss a little bit later when we divide into the different groups. And the key question here is to think about how would we design the project with the stakeholders together? So how do we actually improve the quality of our communication? And you can see I've just shown an example here from one of the workshops that I teach here in Aarhus is we do the exact same thing. We have that framework of looking at the time and thinking, what steps do we need to do to build this particular relationship? Like, I can see that the text is quite small, so you don't actually have to read that text individually. And the whole message here is that when I'm working with PhDs and postdocs on this particular game, they are spending time to move those little pieces of paper around and create different scenarios. You could say this is generally described as a gamification of understanding how we build relationships. So what exactly should we do first? What should we do at the end? And do these tasks have a relationship between each other? And so I give this game to PhDs and postdocs, and they work in a group to try to understand how they should manage their time in building these relationships. So that's an example scenario analysis. And as I was saying, we will do something like that. And so here I have some hints for the tasks that we're doing, and you can remember that we're going to have this structure of looking at before the meeting, at the meeting, and the definition of success. Some examples at the start are based on the analysis activities that I was describing before. And then as we move into and we're at the meeting, then we're taking the concepts that I was just describing for making decisions and making those particular choices. And then finally, the definition of success, so that everyone who's involved in the discussion, so the people from the company and the people from the university, each side has empathy for each other. And so that's really what creates a sustainable relationship. And if we bring it down to the text in red, that this relationship has now grown, that everyone understands that this has to go into a legal contract. And that's something just to think about when we're doing the task just after this. So finally, this is the implementation section. Now, I won't spend too much time on this, but I think some of these areas are important. It's boring but useful, you could say. And this slide here was created by one of my legal colleagues. And you can see that from the left-hand side, they have the project idea, and it continues in the generation of a collaboration to data being created to a paper. And then they have those speech bubbles. And inside those speech bubbles, that describes what the legal manager is thinking about as the collaboration is being designed. So as an example, at the beginning, so when there's the project idea, the legal manager is thinking about confidentiality. So if we have a new technology, we need to be careful about disclosing that technology to stakeholders. How exactly are we going to do that? Then secondly, they might be thinking about access rights. So if we have a new invention at the university and we have a collaboration, does the company have the right to that particular intellectual property? Could they take that invention because of the collaboration? And there are various legal sort of issues in how to understand that. But I think the key message here for any researcher is to have an understanding that a legal manager will have a very different perception of the process of designing a relationship with a company. So as you are going from the project idea to the planning stage and to thinking about publications, they will be looking at very, very different things. And so it's a great idea to meet with the university legal manager early, but also the legal manager from the company as well. And then as a final point, I thought this could be useful just to think about the different types of collaborations. So on the left-hand side, we have co-finance research. This is a very common classical type of collaboration where a postdoc or a professor, they apply for a grant with a company. Then on the other side, commissioned or contract research. This is quite different. This is when a company would have a particular problem that they need to solve, get solved, and they would pay the university for that work. So that kind of language, co-financed research and commissioned research, and those are quite different types of relationships. And it's quite useful to explain to the company that there are different ways of collaborating with the university. And that's just some language to help on that. Now, before I just finish up, I think I noticed that Julie joined into the call. Julie, if you remember, we were discussing about interviews. Are you there? Are you able to hear me?
I am. Yes, I can hear you. Hello, can you hear me?
Fantastic.
Hello.
So I've covered the point that we discussed, that I am suggesting that in this early stage of developing relationships, that it could be a proposal to researchers to consider this type of interview approach to obtain perspective, to understand people. What do you think about that? What are your thoughts?
Well, hello everyone, by the way. Hello, my name's Julie Gould and I'm a journalist for Nature Careers, but mostly freelance, but they're mainly the people I work with. And so one of the things that I do is I spend my life talking to people and interviewing people. And I actually don't think about it as interviewing. I think about it as having a conversation to learn more about what they are doing, to find out more. Often I find that if I go into a chat with that mindset that I'm interested in finding things out, it automatically calms me down, and it makes everything much easier when you're having a conversation rather than putting it as a sort of a Q&A.
Yes.
Because conversations are much more two-way anyway, so you'll often find that the person you're talking to will want to find out more about you as well, which is really nice. And I find if you go in with a relaxed mindset, often things just flow much more smoothly.
Fantastic. Thank you, Julie. Thank you. Well, I think for my final thoughts, I think I've tried to bring in a number of different concepts that I hope can help the process of building these relationships. But I think the key point here is that this type of activity demands endurance, resilience, patience. These relationships are complicated. They're not easy. So I think I can sort of stop there. We can have some questions. And Teresa, I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you, Owen, for a very nice presentation. I don't know if you would prefer to go first to ask the participants some questions, or whether we should jump into the Jamboard exercise first. What do you prefer?
Well, maybe if we have any questions that can be written in the chat, and if anything has popped out there and we can see what people are thinking, we can take if there's any burning questions. If there's not, we can go into the Jamboard.